Right, so now everything's recorded, so we have to be on our best behavior. The good news about the work tonight is that it will kind of support what you're talking about, Candy, because we're going to decide whether to customize an existing standards-driven task or design our own from our focus standards cluster, whatever you're doing in your classroom or with your PLC. And we'll also take a look at some starter tasks and determine how to use them. So this can kind of, build that muscle for when you are having those collaborative discussions. So you'll know how to make the case or when to concede, possibly too. All right, so tonight we are going to start with a discussion in pairs. Then Kim is going to walk us through a slide deck on starter tasks so we can get to know a little bit better what starter tasks are and what goes into their creation. Then we're going to get in small groups and look at some content-specific starter tasks, have a discussion, share out. Then Kim is going to take us through some coaching questions, and we'll look at the work for next week. Is there anything you wanted to add, Kimba?
Nope, that sounds perfect.
All right, so do we have the pairs set up, or are we going to pair people?
I'm just going to go ahead and put everybody with a partner. And if anybody comes in, you might have someone join in your group because somebody signed on a minute or two late. So just be mindful of that as we go into them, okay? So I'm going to create the breakout rooms and just double check that everyone has a partner. So.
And I'll just kind of tell you, we'll put the questions in the chat box. I'll go, but this is what we're going to be discussing. I'll go ahead and put those in the chat box. There we go. So how did you use your student context sheet to think about your focus standards or your goals for the task you made? Why these standards for these students at this time? So we're kind of trying to take that context sheet that you used and then the LDC work and see where they connect. How did your student context sheet make you rethink or help you think about the unique student needs, specifically for your students accessing those standards and mastering them? And then what will you as a teacher need to be already thinking about or considering for all your students to be successful in terms of mastering those standards? So those are the questions, and you can, just discuss whichever pieces of those make the most sense to you in your pairs. Are we ready to shift?
Yep. All right. You should see the message come up, but hold on one second. I want to make sure, because we just had a little moving around in the Zoom, that everybody's in a room. Okay,
oh, and
we're good.
You want to make sure you're off mute.
Yep. All right, here we go. Hopefully you got at least a little bit of time in there, Kristen.
I got a little bit.
Oh, welcome back, welcome back. Hey, how did that whole broadcast little warning work where you guys got about 2 minutes? Was that useful? Yes. See, I didn't have a partner this round, so I stayed in the main room and was able to get Kristen in a group as she came in, and I was like, ooh, I can use some of these tools like broadcast a message. How exciting. All right, in about 1 second, we should see everybody come back. So, you're back.
Does anybody want to share out anything interesting that their partner said or that they said in the breakout session?
Okay, so we ended up talking about how when I was looking at the focus standards and thinking about what my task was going to be about, my student context sheet didn't really enter my mind. I thought a lot about the timing. We both, Candy and I both thought a lot about timing, when it was going to fall on our pacing guide. We thought about, I'm co-taught, so I actually have an LBT teacher with me. So I thought of modifications that I might have to make for the standards and things that would work. But I did not think to look at my 3 and base it on that. I guess that's not where my mind immediately went. Because I'm co-taught, I don't just have low kids. I have students with IEPs that are just above FMD, all the way to distinguished students that are sitting in my classroom. So I've got a very wide variety, and thinking of picking out 3 that might, fall in a certain range and then trying to craft something around them would leave out a big chunk of my student population. And so it's just not something that I thought about.
I was more, we were talking, and we were more focused on what would the standards be. Again, pacing guide, timeline. Where am I at this part of the year? When is this LDC going to fall? And what are the main things I've got to teach to all these kids? But I honestly, I never thought about looking back at the context sheet either.
I'm so glad you guys are being super honest too, because yeah, I mean, like, it's not just a hoop to jump through. This is really about like those mental dispositions, because Bellamy, it sounds like you're going to have to differentiate in a class like that,
Right.
with that broad range. So thinking about like the specific needs of each individual student is not something that's just going to like automatically come naturally. It didn't to me anyways. But once I started thinking about like having the standards drive my instruction, I actually found differentiation was easier, because I could think about how each of my different students might need different things to get to that standard.
Right.
Previously, I had just taught, the curriculum by the pacing guide that was already set. And I thought about like having like texts were really what drove, or topics were really what drove my instruction. But when I had that shift to thinking about standards as driving it, differentiation actually became a lot easier. So, but it's like we said, it's not going to necessarily happen overnight. It's just about like starting to kind of make that mental shift. Did anybody think about, I know Ellie, you did, you thought about your ELL student. Do you want to share anything?
So I just, on my context sheet, I have one student who kind of is ELL. He kind of sometimes gets pulled out of the room with, I don't know the lady's name, to like work on tests and whatnot. But I just said for my piece, because I'm in this time, just like Bellamy said, we are looking at our pacing guide to help, to get some kind of correlation on when we're going to be teaching. So with my task, I kind of just said that for the activity, the student will be thinking critically about what stance they decide if the narrator is reliable or unreliable in Edgar Allan Poe. And I just said that I'd just kind of be redirecting, rereading, offering models, and then also just really making sure that whenever they are giving their argument, that they are backing it up with facts and just citing like evidence from the text. So that was pretty much the gist of it, I think. Did that answer the question?
Yeah, thank you all so much. So Kimba is going to take us now through the starter task slide deck and help us to kind of build that muscle.
Yeah, and one of the things I just want to build from as we go into that was that relationship between what Ellie was just talking about and what Bellamy was bringing up, right? As far as if these are our expectations of what we're driving to, when we choose those focus standards based upon our pacing guides or curriculum, right, whatever those reasons are, we're choosing it. We want to start that thinking now, right? That might not have been our original thought process for setting our goals, but if we know this is our goal, how are we going to help all our kids reach that, right? And different classrooms have different needs and different combinations of what students are going to need you to differentiate for every given year. And so what are some of those scaffolds that all kids are going to need, some are going to need, and how do you help them access that material? And that's really what we're going to spend a lot of time targeting in the next few weeks, is thinking more about who are my students and how do I help give them access to this really rich thinking that I want them to have. And starter tasks, I think, are really beneficial in helping this process, kind of to Sarah's point that she was talking about when she made that shift to the standards. and getting at the thinking work that students need to get to, that really helps understand what those choice points are to differentiate to them, makes it a lot easier, right? Than just sitting there saying, oh my gosh, I know this one text is going to be really rough for half of these kids. How do I help them access it? Well, how do I help them access a particular kind of thinking to that? And I think that gives some direction. So we're going to take a look at starter tasks because I know you guys had an opportunity to kind of explore some of these collections, but I want to talk more strategically about how they work and how we can use your focus standards decisions to help you find more resources to get to the thinking work that you want students to get to. And so I'm going to share my screen, and I realized I'm not have it on what I want it to be on. So there, let me fix that. That's better. So starter tasks, the idea about a starter task is they have the standards already embedded in them, the thinking work of the standards in really clear and concise way. And so it can help take away some of the excess decision points, right? I have a question. Sarah and I were actually talking about this earlier today as we were thinking about starter tasks in this session. When you're getting ready to teach a lesson, or you're starting a new unit and you want to see what's out there, what are the kinds of things you usually search by? Do you search by the topic you're about to teach or the text you plan to use?
Usually the topic. Sometimes it might be the skill if you're
Usually the topic.
Yeah, usually the topic. I was an ELA teacher for a really long time, and so if I was about to start the Crucible or you know, the House on Mango Street or something, I would put that in and start searching what was out there, right? And one of the things that's interesting about a starter task is that instead of starting with the text or the topic, it's starting with the standards. And so when you think about what's that thinking work that you want students to do, that's what you're really looking at a starter task for, because it has that thinking work embedded in it, which really helps to streamline task design, because it takes all of those 5 design decision points and those entry points, and it helps narrow that down, which also makes it easier when you're trying to have common assignments across classrooms. So for example, Candy, you were talking about earlier how thinking about if this task would work for your team. And when you think about what's right for your students, you know, there might be things that you want to hold in common, but other places that you think there's room for some customization or adaptation, right? And that's where a starter task might be really helpful, right? Because what it does is it takes these standards, your reading, your writing, your content standard, and really uses them as a driver in a meaningful way within the task. And because that's so tight and clear, it gives you these other areas that you can use to really customize or adapt for the unique needs of your students or your classroom, where you still can have common conversations around the thinking that students are doing. So let me give you an example. Say you take, this is an upper elementary ELA example, 4th grade. So it shows reading, literature, standard 3, right? And it's using task template IE3, so it's informational explanatory, and it has this cognitive demand of explain. It says, after reading chapter 7 of Phineas L. McGuire Gets Slimed, write a literary analysis in which you explain how Francis O'Rourke Dowell uses one character's thoughts, words, and actions to convey the character traits to the reader. Support your response with evidence from the text. Include examples of the author's use of speech style and figurative language to convey your message to the reader. So when you think about what's happening in this task, when you start breaking it down by the reading standards, you can see where the thinking work of RL 4.3, so describing in depth a character and then drawing on specific details. And in this case, it's using the character's thoughts, words, and actions. And how the language standard of understanding figurative language is embedded in here. And so those two standards are working in tandem. And so a starter task has those pieces embedded in it, but what it allows you to do then is think about, well, where can I change it? If this is the standards part that uses one character's thoughts, words, and actions and getting at this speech style and figurative language, if my focus is RL3, well, maybe depending on the text I use, I might use a slightly different standard here. So if I look at this adapting a starter task, I can choose another text, right? This becomes a choice point in it. As long as the character has something that the character does, thoughts, words, and actions, maybe it's not necessarily figurative language or speech style, maybe it's something else I want to draw from because of the text I'm using, that helps convey the character traits to the reader, right? So you're finding a text that does the same kind of thinking work or allows students to do the same thinking work, and you can use a different text, and now this task can be used in multiple environments, right? So it takes this idea. Do you have a question?
Yeah. Okay. So when we did the homework thing, I went through and picked a module or whatever. What's the difference between the starter task and a module?
So a starter task is the task part of a module that's been written out that you can use and make your own. So what I would suggest doing is with that module that you set up,
Right.
say you like this starter task, you're like, oh my gosh, I want to use it. Because we're using a template and you've already created it, I would just take this language and put it in my template, right? Because now I know I have something that the language works and it captures the thinking work of the standards that I want.
Okay.
Now, if you didn't already have your template made, you could make a copy of a module that's blank or has a rough ladder in it that has this task, and then I edit it and customize it and make it my own. Does that clarify, or does that lead to more questions?
I think it clarifies.
Okay. And if more questions come up, ask them. All right. So the idea is that every task has these 5 decision points, right? Where you're deciding on the text, the writing product, the cognitive demand, the content, the focus standard, making sure that it allows for multiple responses. But these 5 decision parts, these first 5 are really important. And when you look at it in the same task, so this one's an 8th grade literature using flowers for Algernon, right? If I use the same task and I take away some of those decision points because the thinking work's already been done for me. So for example, can I take these green parts out and use another text? I would probably want to find a short story in this case, because it says after reading the short story, write an essay in which you explain how that author reveals key aspects of someone's character or over the course of the text through pivotal lines of your choosing. Right? So that's the idea. And this might be really nice for teams who want to change the text based on the students that are in their classroom and what they need, or what their interests are, or what their backgrounds or contexts are that might help them engage in different ways with it. So I'll show you a couple of other examples. Here's an elementary social studies one, which I think is really interesting. So this focuses on reading informational text, standard 6. After reading articles from opposing points of view about the Boston Massacre, write an essay in which you explain the similarities and differences in each article's point of view about this event. Support your response with evidence from the text. So RI6 at 5th grade asks students to analyze multiple accounts of the same event or topic, noting similarities and differences in the point of view that they represent.
Okay, so I have a question.
Yes, ma'am.
Maybe you already answered this. So I'm reading this, but I honestly don't know what the difference in this example that you're showing us right now. What is the difference in this and an actual LDC? Is this a task? It says task template. So the one you're showing us right now is not, is it a starter task or is it, I guess I'm getting confused with what each of these things actually looks like. So we're talking about tasks and we're talking about modules and we're talking about, you know, like this is a starter task versus a mini task versus a module. Like, I don't understand the differences in each of those things.
I'm super glad that you asked that. One of the things that we're going to do in breakout groups in a few minutes is look at some starter tasks. But the whole thing about a starter task is that we've given it that name because it's a module, but the task of that module, the standard alignment is super clean and makes it really easy to swap out text or topic so you can use that in a variety of contexts.
Okay, so
It's a template.
am I anywhere near being right on this? The module is like the whole package. The starter task is kind of like what we're asking the kids to do, but the module has everything else involved with it, like all the resources and stuff.
Yeah, so I'm going to just click on one of the starter tasks that we can look at. So for example, here I'm at a starter task. Literally, the only reason it's called a starter task is because it's one you can use to help make this really easy. Some of the other tasks that are the modules, some of the other modules that are in the library are not as clean where you can just swap out the text. These ones have the standards where it's tightly aligned and you can literally just swap out the text or the topic. So for example, with that Boston Massacre one, I could just change the event and I could still make this module work. A task is what we refer to as the prompt of the module. So the first section of a module is what task? What is this overarching goal that you have that you're driving towards with this instruction? So a task is the prompt of your module.
So Kimba, I have a question just to clarify. So the task is the task for students, but when we call it a starter task, it's because it's easy for teachers to start with. Is that right?
Got it.
Okay.
Yep.
So the starter is for the teachers, but the task is for the students.
Yeah. So what task? And that's what drives your module. Now, what makes it a full module, back to that question, is the next part, is section 2 and 3, what skills and what instruction. When you have the instructional ladder that calls out how you're going to support students in developing that task, that's what makes it the full module. And this is made up of skills and mini tasks. So if you say that my students need certain skills to be able to do this, I'm going to explicitly teach those skills through these mini formative assessments that are then the mini tasks. And so in the larger scope of this whole project, semester 1, we're only focusing on section 1, what task. We're going to work on getting a really good task because that's where, based on the work of Richard Elmore, the idea that the stronger your task is, what you're asking students to do, the better your outcomes are. So we're going to talk about what makes a really good, clear task. Because if you're going to devote 1 to 3 weeks of time to develop this thinking work, you want it to be good and you don't want it to necessarily fall apart and be confusing for students. Now, the reason why we had to use a template, Candy, is because those templates had a possible ladder that you could just use that's fairly generic, but you could just use and try it. So, and then next,
ladder, what do you mean?
Ladder, I mean this section. Section 2 and 3, what skills and what instruction, so that instructional ladder. So it already has something there for you, just like this one already has something here. So you don't have to necessarily design it from scratch because that's not our goal for semester 1. Now, semester 2, we're probably going to use a starter task, so you don't have to spend a whole lot of time trying to think about what your task should be, because we're going to make sure you have a good rated task Because in the next semester, when we come back in January, we're going to focus our attention on section 2 and 3, what skills and instruction. Does that help with some of the terminology and the vocabulary that's going around?
I have one more question. I'm really sorry.
No, don't apologize. Please ask it.
Okay, just make sure I heard this correctly. This first semester, you said we're focusing on section 1, the task.
Yeah.
And then after Christmas, second semester, whatever, we're going to be working on the ladder, sections 2 and 3.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so
but not on the task.
What?
But not on the same task.
Thank you. That's what I'm saying. Like, I don't understand how we're supposed to get this done in November, do an LDC by November, if we don't have it all completed. So
Well, just to chime in, a lot of the work has already been done. That's the beauty of these templates that are like, there's already stuff there for you that's been vetted and high quality.
Okay.
So you might need to
Yeah.
adapt, but.
Okay, so to help us understand, and I'm kind of where Candy is, in November, we are okay with taking and adapting one that has already been created
in the LDC library.
In the LDC library to meet our needs.
Exactly.
Okay.
And the way we're going to do that is we're going to look at the starter task because it's already set for us. We're just going to replace certain things with the text that we need.
Hallelujah. Yes, exactly.
Okay. We can do this.
Beautiful. And the idea, and I'm going to stop sharing for a minute and then I'll share again. This is really important. And this is the big difference from what some of your experience might have been before versus what what we're trying to do now, is that there are so many tools and resources to make this easier for you to get to good quality assignments so you can really focus on what your students' needs are and getting it right and thinking about all of those other decisions, because we're going to start from something like a starter task. It's not about designing it from scratch. Whereas before, it was about designing the whole thing from scratch in 3 days. That's what we're not doing that anymore. That help?
Mm-hmm.
All right. Awesome. Keep asking questions, because that's what's really important to do when we're in these conversations. Because one of you has it, I'll bet you half the group has the exact same question. So just throw it out. It's good. All right. I'm going to share my screen again. And I want to just give one more, I just want to show one more thing with this. So when we're thinking about this module and this task of a module, right, the goal. So I'm back to this as a starter task. Could I just change this event? If I'm teaching social studies and what I have coming up in November has nothing to do with the Boston Massacre, does that mean I can no longer use this task, or can I use this task and change the event?
Yes.
You should be, it's just a template, right? So you should be able to just plug any topic in there.
Especially if you look at the standard, it just says of the same event or topic. It doesn't matter what it is, as long as it's historical.
Exactly. So when I build my focus cluster, my focus standard cluster, I'm going to take RI6 and say, okay, this matters to me. I'm teaching 5th grade. That's going to be important. But I'm also going to have this, my content standard that I'm actually addressing right now, right? And maybe your content standard is about a totally different time period, where I'm going to choose a time period that has different viewpoints on it, an event, right? And I'm going to find articles that show different points of view about that same event. And that's how I'm going to frame my assignment. So let's go ahead and take a look at this in some small groups. I have half of you going with Sarah, half of you coming with me, and we're going to take a look at some starter tasks in that environment so we can start seeing them as a module, right? And rather than on a slide deck, right? So we can help make these connections for ourselves and how we want to use them for our own task design. Sound good?
Yes.
Awesome, possum. All right, I do think I have to stop sharing in order to open the breakout groups. So that's what I'm going to do. And I'm going to go ahead and move us all into breakout groups. Let's see. I'm going to make sure that everyone's in one. We should be good. So I'm going to go ahead and open all the rooms, okay? Sorry, I just wanted to make sure everybody got out of the other room before I came into this room.
I was stuck. I was looking at stuff on the LDC website. Sorry.
Oh, that's no problem. I was just making sure that people didn't have any problems, because in the last group, somebody, every time they tried to join a breakout room, got totally kicked out. So that made it kind of tough. All right, let's go ahead and take a look at this other. Let's start with a science one. I want to show you a science one. Nah, social studies. Let me show you this one social studies one, and let's talk through it, okay? I'm going to put the link in the chat. So go ahead and click the link that I just put in the chat. And then it should take you to a social studies. It's grade 4, and it's again point of view RI6. But we can see what that looks like in grade 4. Just to think about it as a starter task, and then we'll look at a science one. Does that sound good? All right. So I have a couple of questions for you that, do you have a problem opening it, Decker?
No, it gave me a pop-up. I think I'm okay. There's just so much going on my screen at the same time. I'm good. I think I'm okay.
All right. So rather than sharing my screen, we'll just look at our own, or actually this first part, I'm going to share my screen for just a quick second. And then I'll let you guys just kind of look at it yourself. But one of the things that you can see is that the way a starter task is titled in the library is it's titled by the grade level and the reading standard. Sorry, I did it backwards. Grade level and the reading standard. So if you're looking for something that addresses RI6 and you teach 4th grade, this might be something worthwhile to do, right? Rather than searching by topic, you're searching by standard. And so go ahead and take a minute and read through the standards. So you see RI46, and you can see the social studies. This happens to be a Florida social studies standard. But at the 4th grade level, RI6 is asking students to compare and contrast a first-hand and second-hand account of the same event or topic and describe the differences in focus and the information provided. So if you look at this task, what do you see of that reading standard reflected in the thinking work of the task? And is it easier for me just to share my screen so we can all look at it, or would you rather me stop sharing?
No, I like it shared, yeah.
Okay, I'll leave it shared then.
Well, they're reading a first-hand account and they're reading a second-hand account.
And then they have to give the differences between both accounts.
Mm-hmm.
It's in the
Well,
differences.
okay, yeah.
Well, hold on. In which
Not until the last line. I mean, the last line says explain how the primary source and secondary source are different in focus. But before that, it has them compare how it contributes to the understanding of the event.
the significance.
Of the significance of the event.
It's not even about necessarily the event.
Right, but then
It's about how they add to whether or not the event was important historically.
So could you take this as a starting place and use maybe an event, since 4th grade is all about like state history, right? You could think about an event in Kentucky or an event in something that you're studying, and compare how each source gives different information about that event? Because are they learning about the event as they're comparing and understanding that different sources provide different perspectives and information?
Yes.
Mhm.
Now, even if you start with this as a beginning point, could you play around with the language of it a little bit? But what are the parts that you probably don't want to lose sight of?
Where they explain how the primary and secondary source are different in what they focus on. Because that's what
Yeah.
the actual reading standard is. How does a first-hand account and a second-hand account differ in what they focus on when they're describing the same kind of event?
Exactly. And so when you're trying to figure out what text to use, you're going to try to find something that's at least having one first-hand and one second-hand account, right? So that way students can do that comparison. So it gives you some guidance of what to look for. Okay, so let's take this and let's apply the same kind of thinking to a science example and see what that looks like, okay? So I'm going to just pull up the science example. It's a third, fourth grade. I believe it's more, yeah, it's fourth grade more than third. They should have specified right here, but that's okay. Fourth grade, reading RI 4.3. So explain events, procedures, ideas, or concepts in historical, scientific, or technical text, including what happened and why, based on specific information in the text. They have a Colorado academic standard for science, so use evidence to develop a scientific explanation about one or more processes that break down and or combine Earth materials. So it's pretty big, broad standard, right? So how did they approach that in the task? What do you notice about how the thinking work of the standards are reflected in it?
Well, I mean, they've got the specific science stuff in there about how the Earth can break down, or because they've got the specific like weathering, erosion, and deposition. I don't know if I said that right. I don't teach science.
They're facts.
Okay, so they're asked to write an essay where they explain the different processes and how they affect the surfaces of the Earth, which their reading standard is to explain events or procedures in a scientific or technical text, including what happened and why.
Mm-hmm.
So
Right.
what could be changed in this task, and what would need to remain constant to maintain the integrity or fidelity to the reading standard? Like, could you change the content standard with this, or do you think you'd have to have the same content standard?
Well,
If you were to adapt it.
I would think you'd be able to change the content to any content that talks about an explanation, developing an explanation for something, or
Events, procedures, ideas, or concepts.
mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. I mean,
I think you could use a math standard with this, perhaps social studies standard or a science standard. Like, I don't know.
Because you want to get at what happened and why, and how that concept, event, procedure, idea, right? Understanding it from the text to be able to explain what happened and why. So I'm going to stay in the realm of science for just a hair. Stacy or Kristen, are there other processes in science that you could see doing something like this where it wouldn't be about the Earth, but it might be about something else? Could I do photosynthesis if I was doing cells and kind of getting into biology more than geology, maybe?
Yeah, we're kind of talking about, life science and photosynthesis now, and the process of how that affects the ecosystem. So you could do something in that, or talking even about maybe like the energy of the food chains and how that affects the process of the ecosystems. So you could take it in a life science perspective as well, especially for fifth grade.
Excellent. So you could totally use this and just have it as a starting point, and then start you know, playing around with the processes that you're talking about now and how it impacts the ecosystem. Like I heard you just take this and translate it into something totally relevant to what you're working on right now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Like that's the idea of we've developed a sub collection in the library where it becomes a little easier to think about how to put the standards together in meaningful ways. That's all.
Kimba, do you have time to show us, like when I'm looking at your screen, it says like the LDC library, and then it's got an arrow, and then it's got dots, and it's got an arrow, and then it says starter task, science, RI.3. Is there like, when you're looking at modules and stuff, you can like narrow it down, you know, you can refine your search. I guess I'm just asking, is the starter task, like how yours actually says starter task, did you click on something that got you to the start? Like, I'm confused at how you got to.
So here in the LDC library, there is a collection that's starter task collection. In the starter task collection, there's a subfolder that has starter tasks with ladder templates. So that means they at least have some kind of ladder to them, and they're divided into folders. So how you get
the starter task thing?
Yeah. So if I'm here in the library, if I want to search, and I know I want a starter task because that's something that might be helpful for me, I click search, and I'll get. Oh, it's just giving me because I'm already here. I have to go back out. Sorry, I already had the filter happening. But if I'm in the full library and there's 4,792, I need to filter that, right? I can go starter task. And once I do, I'm probably going to want to filter by this collection right here, because collections are like Google folders, right? The modules, the mini tasks are the Google Docs, and the collections are the folders where they're stored in. And so collections are really helpful to search and find things. So if I deselect module and mini task as a filter here.
There's 159 that pop up on mine if I take that.
Yeah. And then what you'll want is either the starter task overall collection or the starter task with ladder template one. When you click on the starter task with ladder template, and I just advise those because they at least have something in the skills and instruction rather than just a task and not the rest of the module. Then it's in subfolders divided by secondary or elementary, and then by ELA, social studies, science. There aren't any math starter tasks yet because these are all taken from actual tasks that are in the library, but are just ones that make good starts, right? Like they just give you that leg up and are nice and clean. Was that kind of helpful, Julie?
Yes, it was. Thank you.
Perfect. Yeah, you know it. All right. So when we go back to the main group, I'll be asking, what are some of your thinking or takeaways when it comes to starter tasks? Like, what's rumbling around in your head right now as far as like, I'm excited when I think about how Stacy just took one look at that and said, oh, that's what I'm doing. I can take this to exactly what I'm doing in my classroom right now with photosynthesis and ecosystems, right? And you just rattled that off quickly. And I feel like that to me is the power of having something that's aligned as a model to build from, right? So think about what your takeaways are. We're going to be back in the room in just a second. I think I have to stop sharing because I have to close the breakout groups. But we'll be back in about. So I get all the announcement in my phone, so I can't hear anything. So think about what you want to share out when we go back, okay? And feel free to just click leave breakout rooms. You can go right to the session. See, they're sucking every last second out of that room, but I figured we could just come back and be here. All right. Gang's all here. Here we come. Here we come. Oh, that was smart, Lauren. There you go. All right. So or Lacey. Did I say Lauren instead of Lacey? Dang it, Lacey. I was even looking at your face and it came out all crazy in my head. Sorry about that, Lacey. But that was smart. So what do you think about starter tasks now that you had a chance to kind of dig into them and think more deeply? What did you notice about how to use them, or what are your takeaways from being in that breakout room?
They make things easier, and you can easily replace a lot of things.
Mm-hmm.
That's what I was going to say. I was going to say it's nice that they're easily adaptable. Like, you had pulled up the science one in ours, and even just looking at that starter task, even though it was like a science-based one, I kept thinking about how many like social studies events would have worked really well for it. So just seeing where someone starts and being able to think, well, what do I teach? What am I supposed to teach? And how can I make it fit what's already written here?
Or the fact that we were talking and it was easily adaptable to what you're doing now. So you're not having to reinvent the wheel. You can just take it and change a few things or tweak it to make it your own and make it adaptable to you.
And to your kids. I mean, we had a lot of great ideas about different ways that people could use these tasks to differentiate for interest and for even gifted students. Ramping it up in terms of the writing task or the different texts you're using.
Excellent. So we're in our last couple of minutes, and I do want you to post your one word or phrase takeaway from today when thinking about this work. But I have one resource that I do want to share with you that can help you as you're making some of those decisions. And it's something we'll come back to in the next couple of weeks, but it's called out on the syllabus. And so I want to show you where it's at on the syllabus and then show you the document and just give it a little context as you're thinking about what you want to put in the chat. And feel free to start typing your final word in the chat now if you would like as well. On the syllabus at the bottom of today's agenda, we have this during design responsive coaching questions. And when we were talking about starter tasks, we looked at that star, and you're going to see that star as you go into session 3 this week and begin session 3. You are going to be in session 3 for the next 2 weeks. So really take your time to go through those decisions and kind of work through them. But starting off session 3 is that same star of those 5 decision points in every task. And what this resource does is it gives you questions to consider that you can use to support others. That's the coaching part. But you can also use it to support yourself as far as when I'm thinking about my focus standards and how they fit together. These are some questions I want to keep in mind. While I'm choosing my writing product or my text, these are some of the questions I want to keep in mind. So it's just a nice resource. We'll come back to this, but I just wanted to call it out and let you know that it's there. You can just put it away in your pocket for a minute or have it out handy while you're making some of these decisions and going through session 3 over the next couple of weeks. But I think this will be something that you'll find value in. All right. I see a number of posts all coming through, ready to go, adaptable, really great words, easy button. That's fun. All right, y'all. Have a wonderful day. Thank you so much for your time, and I know we're right at time. So if you have any questions, Sarah, please feel free to stay on. Otherwise, happy Wednesday. Have a great day.
Thank you.